dishes, okay?
Okay, this video is the first in a series that's going to demonstrate the labs that make up the MOAC course for configuring advanced Windows. This is the textbook that was used. The labs that I'm going to be working from are actually based off of the labs that are found online, but I just wanted to do a walkthrough just to help ensure that everyone's been able to follow the right steps. There's a lot of different little steps that weren't necessarily included in the lab or even in the book, so I just want to make sure that everything's covered. So this is the book that we're going to be basing everything off of. This first video is the lab setup. Now there's a few, like I said, a few steps that we need to cover that aren't covered in that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file folder in my C drive. This is going to be where I store my virtual machine and my virtual hard disks. So I'm just going to click on my C drive and I'm going to do new and folder, and I'll call this my virtual machines. Enter. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and open this. There are two folders that we're going to need as part of this. Oops. One is the, oops, let's call this virtual server files. And I'm going to have two files in here. Actually, it'll end up being three. New folder, virtual machines, right click, new folder, virtual hard disks. Now the other file I need in here, I just put these in here to remind me to put them in there, is it's a folder called software. I'm just going to move this over and I'll open up and I'll show you what I have in here. These are all files that I've downloaded in advance. So we have an ADK setup, an ADM X migrator, an auto attend. I have a Chrome setup. This was actually, I don't actually need this anymore. When I was actually working on Server 2012 as a live machine, I found Internet Explorer to be cumbersome, so I just had added Chrome to it. I have a server key that I use. This is just a text file that gives me the license that I need to enter for each of the new machines. This is a Specky setup. This is actually a really cool program. Again, it's a free download, and I'll go over to that in a minute. Also a System Center monitoring pack and the WSEMP file. So I'm going to open up the spec, and I just want to show you guys what this is. It's actually a really cool program. So this is just a diagnostic program that's going to give you all the information about your machine. I don't want to take any time to load this now, but it's just a really cool program. So we're going to go ahead and close out of this. So we have software, virtual hard disks, and virtual machines. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is go into, I'm working off of a Windows 8.1 Pro, so I'm going to right click on my task, my icon, and then go into Control Panel, Programs and Features, and I'm going to turn Windows features on or off. This is where you're going to find Hyper-V, and you want to make sure you've checkmarked Hyper-V. And if you have 8.1 Pro, it's going to be here. If you do not have 8.1 Pro, you will not find Hyper-V on here. And I recommend, if you want to run Hyper-V, you actually have to upgrade to Windows 10 in order to get access to it. Or if you have access to DreamSpark, they have the 8.1 Pro through DreamSpark, which is really, really helpful. So I'm going to click on OK because I've already installed Hyper-V, and I'll go ahead and close out of this. Now the next thing I want to do, this is my taskbar, is I want to add Hyper-V as a shortcut icon to my taskbar because we're going to be using it quite a bit. So I'm going to right click on my Windows icon again and do search, and then just type in Hyper, and here's my icon that I want to add. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to pin to my taskbar, and now it's right here on my taskbar. So we're going to open up Hyper-V, and the next thing I want to do is go into Hyper-V settings. This is going to be where I tell it where I want to store my files, and I'm going to create my first virtual switch. So virtual disks, I'm going to click on Browse and then click on my C drive, and then scroll down. Here's my virtual server files, and this is the virtual hard disks. And I want to select that folder, and then under virtual machines, Browse, C drive. I initially tried to put this on my Google Drive, but because of the size of the program, I just didn't have enough space, so I'm going to just put it on my C drive. I'm going to go ahead and do apply from here. Alright, the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is close out of this and go into my virtual switch manager. Now before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and show you what I have under my network adapters. So I'm working off of a Wi-Fi now. So I'm going to go into adapter settings, and you'll see that I have a Bluetooth adapter, plus I have an Ethernet cable which is not plugged in because I very rarely ever plug into the Ethernet, and I have my active Wi-Fi. So I currently have these three as part of my live machine. So I'm just going to close out of this. Now I'm going to go in my virtual switch manager, and I want to add an internal switch. So we have to create an internal switch so we can get connectivity between the virtual machines, and we're going to have basically 4 virtual machines running. The RWDC, which is our domain controller, server 1 and server 2, and then storage 1. I think we set up storage 1 during the first lab. So we're going to create an internal switch and create, and we're going to name it. So I'm going to name it Contoso_INT, and I'll accept the rest of the defaults and then click on apply, and then click on OK. Now I'll go ahead and go back into my adapter settings again, and you'll actually see right here where I have my no access, but it sees the Contoso. So I'll go into adapter settings, and you'll see that it's here. So here's my Contoso internal switch that I just created. Now before I go any further, I want to go ahead and assign a static IP address. Minimize my Hyper-V. So I'm going to double click on my switch, click on properties, and scroll down, select IPv4, go into properties, and we want to use, again, a static, so that means we have to enter in our IP address. And according to the lab, we want to set this IP address as .192.168.100.50. Click on Tab to accept the default for the subnet mask. Now it says if you have internet access, add the address for the DNS server and an address for the default gateway. So to get that information, if you go into your live machine and right click, go go into your command prompt, or you can just run cmd and type in ipconfig. And I'm going to scroll up. Okay, and here's my information for my live machine. Here we have my subnet mask and our default gateway. So our default gateway is going to be 192.168.0.1, and I'm going to go ahead and use that as my preferred DNS. And close and close. Now keep in mind that as we're going through this, during these labs, we won't necessarily need to have access to the internet for our virtual machines, but I do have access to the internet for my live machine because that switch is not affected. So I can go into Google. So the connectivity with my live machine is not affected because, again, we created a separate switch. So that's my adapter for my live machine, which is Wi-Fi, and this is the virtual adapter, which is going to connect our machines. Okay, so now we've set up the first switch and we've set up our folders. The next thing we're going to do is click on Actions, and we want to do a new virtual machine. Now before you do this, make sure you have a server ISO available, server 2012 ISO. This copy happens to be a standard. Again, I downloaded this from DreamSpark. And this first machine is going to be called RWDC01, and this is our domain controller. Next, next, and the start memory is going to be 2048. And we're going to go ahead and use dynamic memory because it's just a lab. And next. Okay, here's the connection. This is where we're going to identify the switch that we wanted to connect to. So we're going to connect to the Contoso INT. And next. And then the space that we want to use on here. Going to be 70, and then we'll go ahead and click on next, and I'm going to install a server from an ISO, so I'm going to click on that and image ISO and browse, and that's my ISO, and next and finish. Okay, so now I have it set up. So now if I go into, I'll select it, right click, and start. I'm just going to double click it to open it, minimize the Hyper-V, and now it's just going to work through the setup process for server. Okay, and we're going to make sure we choose the server. And then accept. And we want to do a custom install for, so we don't want to do an upgrade. And then allow it to install. Okay, so now we're going to put in password. Now the password we're going to be using throughout all of these labs is going to be the same. It's going to be capital P A $$ W0RD. And I'll put the little I here so you guys can see what that is. So it's capital P little a $$ W0RD. That's going to be the same thing we're going to use throughout. Oops. I'll wait for it to boot up. Now, because this is a virtual machine, normally to get our sign in we would do the Control-Alt-Delete, but with Hyper-V we do Control-Alt-End to pull up our sign-in sheet. Okay, so now while it boots up, it's going to pull up. This is going to happen automatically. It's going to automatically pull up Server Manager. And again, you can tell that we're on the domain controller, the RWDC01, because it says it up in the name bar. And I'm going to go ahead and click on View and Full Screen, just to isolate what we're doing. Alright, there's a couple of things that we're going to have to do here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on Local Server. And over to the right, you're going to see the time zone. We're going to click on the time zone and adjust the time. Okay, for me it's 1:12 p.m. and I'm on Eastern. So I'm going to do change Eastern and then OK. And it updated the time, so we're going to click on OK. The next thing I'm going to do is create a static IP address. So again, it's going to act like a server. Actually, it is a server. Going to change adapter settings. Actually, let me back up. So to get to that screen down here, we're going to click on our little adapter and right-click, Open Network and Sharing Center. Change adapter settings. Here's our switch that we had set up in the very beginning, and double click, and then properties, select IPv4 properties, and we're going to put in the address. tab. .192.168.1.50, and we're going to use a DNS server of 192.168.1.50. Now from here, we're going to click on Advanced and Add, and 192.168.1.00.55, tab to accept the default subnet mask, and then Add, and then OK, and OK again. And we'll go ahead and close out of our Ethernet properties, close out of our status, close here, close here. Now the next key thing that we have to do is go into our computer name, and a lot of people make the mistake of thinking they're putting their computer name here. This is just the computer description. We actually have to change the name of the computer. So to do that, we have to click on Change, and we're going to call this RWDC01. And then click on OK. It's going to make us reboot. Close. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do a restart now. So we're going to let it restart. And then as soon as it restarts, I'm going to pause the video, and as soon as it comes back up, I will go ahead and turn the video back on. Okay, so we are in the process of rebooting back up. Now the next step is that we're going to install Active Directory and the domain name server. So what we're going to do, as soon as the server manager pops up, we will go ahead and do that. And we're going to do that through the Add Roles and Features option. So from here, we're going to click on Manage, Add Roles and Features. Oops. Still collecting data. Alright, I'm just going to click on skip this page by default, and next, next. Okay, so from here, we want to click on Active Directory, Domain Services, click on Add Features, and then we're going to add DNS Server, which is right here, and then Add Features, and then Next, 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 and then install. Okay, so this says installed. We're going to click on close and go up to our little yellow triangle. All right, let's go into Tools, and then DNS. And then we are going to right click on the RWDC01 and click on New Zone. And next, we want to go ahead and do a primary zone. And we'll go ahead and keep it as a forward. Next, for the zone name, we're going to type in contoso.com. And then next, and finish. All right, now we are going to close out of this. Now we're going to click on a little yellow triangle and select Promote this server to a domain controller. We want to do Add a new forest with a root domain of contoso.com. And then next, wait for it to come up. And then we're going to use our default, our password, that PA $W0RD. Okay, so now we're going to put in our password. Then next. Next. Let it think for a minute. Next. 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 I'm going to go ahead and close out a server manager. And hopefully it just didn't shut down on me. Yep, that's exactly what it did. I minimized server manager this time, just to get it out of the way. If I scroll down, you can see that it's still open, it's just minimized. Okay, so it did that. And let's go ahead and do install. Okay, I got a pop-up box saying you're about to be signed out, and that's completely fine. It's got to do a reboot in order to complete the installation process. Now the other way we can do the to get to the sign-on screen besides Control-Alt-End is if we go up here to our Hyper-V menu, we can click on our little Control-Alt. There's a little button that allows us to do that. Okay, I'm going to click on Contoso Administrator. Oops. Okay, we're going to click on Tools, and we're going to go into the DNS Manager again. Only this time, we're going to define expand the forward lookup zones first. And there's Contoso. And we're going to right click on that. Oops. Left click, right click, and properties. We're going to click on change. We want to store the zone in Active Directory. And then click on OK. Yes. And dynamic updates, we want secure and non-secure. And we're going to go ahead and do OK. Now we're going to click on the reverse lookup zone. Right click, new zone, and next, 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 next. Under the IP network, type in 192.168.1 is the network, and then next, let's go accept the defaults here, click on next, and finish. And we're going to close out of the DNS console. Now we're going to go back into our server manager and install DHCP. So click on Manage, add roles, and next. I'm going to minimize this. Okay, maybe not. Next. And we're going to install DHCP, add features. Next. 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 Install. And just for point of reference, you can see that we are still on the RWDC, or this is our domain controller virtual machine. Okay, now we'll go ahead and click on Close. And then under our Server Manager, we're going to open up the DHCP. Let's go into Tools, DHCP, minimize that. go. Okay, so we are going to expand the RWDC01 Contoso.com node, and here's the IPv4. We're going to right click on that and do new scope, and next, and we're just going to call this main scope. Next, the start IP address is 192.168.1.30. The end is going to be 192.168.1.40. Oops. And then next, we're going to change our days to 1, and then next, and then next again. Next. So here we are on the domain and DNS server page. We already have Contoso.com here. And that's already in as a parent name. And then under the IP address, 192.168.1.50, and add, and then next, yes, I want to activate the scope now, next, finish, and then we are going to right click, oops, left click, right click, and authorize. And then we're going to close out of the DHCP console. Alright, so now this is where we're going to add the software folder to our domain controller, because keep in mind our domain controller is essentially going to be the center of our virtual network. Now, before I go too far with that, I'm going to go into my live machine, go to my folder, virtual server files. Okay, I'm going to left click once onto software. I have to make this a shared folder. I'm going to right click, properties, sharing, advanced sharing, share this folder, permissions, full control, apply, OK, and then OK. Now we're going to go into share, and I want to share this with everyone. And then add, and then read write, and then share. Okay, so now this folder has been shared from my live machine. So I am going to kind of shrink this down a little tiny bit and move it over. Shrink down a little bit more. This way I can remember where I need to point. Okay. Oops. Alright, so I'm going to open up a folder here. And click on network. There's actually a couple of ways to do this. If I just click on network, it'll allow me to make my network visible. Turn on network discovery and file sharing, and yes. Now the other thing I'm going to need, I may not need my IP address. So we're going to try and find the software folder that's over here. See if it found it. Doesn't look like it. Nope. So I'm actually going to share my virtual server files just to make things easier. Okay, now let's try it. Okay. Okay, so I had to put in my password to get to my live machine, and here are the folders. So I'm just going to click on software and Control C. And I want to put this PC and Control V. And I'm going to close out of my live machine folder. Alright, so now this is my domain controller. I want to go ahead and share this from my domain controller because I'm going to share this with the server 1 and server 2 just to ensure that we can connect. So I'm going to click on properties and sharing, advanced sharing, share this folder, permissions, apply, OK, click OK here. On share, just click on everyone and add, read write, share, done. Close. Okay, so now we've established connectivity between my domain controller and my live machine. That's a good sign. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a second virtual switch. So I need to close or shut this down, actions, shut down, and go into my Hyper-V. Let's shut down first. So we've already have the one switch. Now we're creating, which is an internal switch. Now we have to create a second switch, and this one's going to be a private switch. So now it's off. Now I can go into my Hyper-V. So we can see that my machine is off. We're going to go into Virtual Switch Manager. Now we're going to do private, create virtual switch, and again I'm going to call this Contoso PRV for private, and then apply. So now we see we have two virtual switches here, and then OK. Just double check to make sure. We have Virtual Switch Manager. Here is our internal. And then we have our new switch, which is our private switch. And it is listed as a private network. Okay, so that is set. All right, now we're going to install server 1. We don't need to have the domain controller turned on or in an on state while we install the server, but when we configure the server, it's going to need to be on in order for it to see the Contoso network. But for right now, I'm going to leave this off. All right, actions. Oops. New virtual machine, server 01. Double click. Oops. Double click. Actions. Start. Now I'm going to go ahead and shut the video off. This is going to be the same as it was for RW for the domain controller, just to save on time. And then I'll turn it back on once we get rebooted and into the server itself.